All right, welcome back. We just finished up Matthew chapter 6, and we're going to press on to Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7 starts with one of the most controversial verses probably in the Bible. The first two verses of Matthew 7 say, "Judge not that you not be judged, for with the judgment you judge, you will be judged, and with the measure you use it, it will be measured back to you." So, as we're jumping into Matthew chapter 7, just a few notes. Few thoughts on Matthew chapters 5 and 6. Remember, in Matthew chapter 5, we started in what is called the Sermon on the Mount. This is Jesus' message. It's a sermon. It's a bunch of teachings that he gives us and his disciples on how to live life, how to act, how to behave, attitudes, what will bring us our glory to God and good to us. Remember that. When you live your life, before you do anything, does this bring glory to God and does it bring good to me? That's what Jesus is getting at in the Sermon on the Mount. These are he starts off in Matthew 5, and all of this in Matthew 5 and 6 so far have been addressed towards us as individuals, to our very heart, to our heart. It's an internal attitude, is what he's been addressing. What's your motivation for why you do what you do? It's not so much that you shouldn't commit adultery, the act of adultery, but it's your heart. Are you thinking on women in the wrong way? So adultery starts in your heart. Murder starts in your heart. It's not the act of it. In the eyes of God, it's not the act of it. Now, nobody in our culture is going to prosecute you in a court of law for thinking about killing somebody. They're not going to do that. You have to do the act. They're not going to prosecute you for hating somebody, but God can, because he knows your thoughts. He knows your heart. He can pass judgment on you because he's the only one who can know hearts and minds. We can't. So therefore, Jesus says that if it's your intent to think upon a woman, to lust after her, you've already committed adultery in his eyes, so you're already guilty. If you have hatred in your heart for your brother, you're already guilty of murder, because a murder is a result of hatred. And so Matthew 5 and 6 have been about the internal man, our what drives us, what's our attitude, what's our motivation for doing with the things that we do. So in Matthew 7, he's going to start getting into some external factors. How do we treat other people? And he's going to start immediately with judgment. How do we judge people? Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 and 2 are not telling us not to judge people, because we're going to see it becomes very obvious that that's not what Jesus is talking about. The moment that somebody says, well, you're judgmental, well, so are they, because they just judged you by saying you're judgmental. So we as human beings, judgment, you can't not judge. You will judge people. You will think on people. You will discern situations. If you go vote in the next election, you are judging somebody, whether they are worthy of your vote or not. So if you're one of those who goes around saying, well, you shouldn't judge people, well, then you need to practice that yourself and not vote in the next election, because when you vote, you're passing judgment. The issue is I don't like people passing judgment on things I disagree with them on. So that's where we get into this, well, you shouldn't judge people. Well, if you're making that statement, you're already judging those people. So we will always be judging. So because of that, Jesus gives us a standard for judging, for judging one another. And he starts at that in Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. Judge not that you not be judged. For with the judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the measure you use it, it will be measured back to you. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but not consider the plank in your own eye? Verse 4, or how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye, and look, a plank is in your own eye? And then in verse 5 he says, hypocrite, you're a hypocrite if you do that. First remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Before we judge somebody, this is what Jesus is saying, before we judge somebody, before we criticize somebody, before we go to somebody with an issue that we see in their life that they need to fix, we need to make sure that issue is fixed in our life. So before you go to your brother or your sister or your mom or your dad or anybody and try to discuss with them a problem that you see in their life, you better make sure that you don't have that problem in your life. And usually it's much more prevalent in our life than it is in theirs. We tend to see the faults of other people that we struggle with. Those are magnified in our life. If I struggle with an issue, then I'm going to see that same issue in the lives of other people because I'm very familiar with that issue because I struggle with it. So I better make sure that before I go talking to somebody about what I perceive as a problem in their life that they need to stop, I better make sure that I have already addressed that problem in my life and I have somebody holding me accountable for that. So Jesus is not saying don't judge. That's not what he's saying because that's impossible. You and I are going to judge people. And as we read through this chapter, we're going to see that Jesus talks about judging people and how to judge people and how we should be judging people. So he's not saying here when we take verses out of context, when we don't know what the Bible says, we make ignorant, irresponsible statements like, well, we shouldn't judge one another. That is not true. That is not what Jesus is saying at all. He said we should not unjustly judge other people. We should not be judging people for things that we ourselves haven't corrected in our own lives yet. So that's the gist of what he's saying there in Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 3. Again, if somebody's telling you that, well, Jesus says you shouldn't judge people, therefore you're judgmental. Well, now they are the hypocrite because they're passing judgment on you while saying that you shouldn't be judging. They need to go pull the plank out of their own eye. They haven't pulled the plank out of their own eye yet in order to make that statement. And if they truly understood what this passage said, they wouldn't say that at all. They wouldn't be saying that. It's just an ignorance of the Word of God. So in verse 6, he says, he moves on here to another topic real quickly. He says, do not give that what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you in pieces. Verse 6 here, dogs and swine, pigs, swine or pigs, hogs, were considered to be dirty animals. still are today, even in the if you go to the Middle East and that culture, dogs are typically wild. They're dirty. They're unwanted. I spent a lot of time over there. There's a lot of wild dogs over there. A lot of dangerous dogs over there. So they would consider them to be unwanted. As pigs, dirty. To the Jews, very dirty animal. They won't eat pork. I don't eat much pork because I find that it makes me feel sick. Though I like it, it's not a very clean animal. So he says here, do not give what is holy to dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine. Well, what's holy is of God. So he's saying don't give the things of God to those who are dogs. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. Nor cast your pearls before swine. Pearls are priceless. Pearls are valuable. Pearls would be the things of Christians in the eyes of Jesus here. And he's saying the things that are of God, do not give to people who are dogs or pigs. And now because Jesus is very clear in the Bible that we're to share the gospel, share truth, and share our love with everybody. He says, however, if there's people who abuse you, they reject you, he says here that they would tear you into pieces. In other words, they're hostile to you. If it's a hostile person and you try to share the love of Christ with them, and then they're hostile to you, they're scorners, they ridicule you, get away from them. You don't want to spend your time with them. They're not ready to hear it. They're not ready to receive this. Therefore, move on from them. Matthew 10, Jesus says the same thing to the disciples as he sends them out into the highways and the byways, into the cities. He tells the disciples, he says, if somebody rejects you, they treat you like this, then you are to leave their house and knock the dust off of your feet. Don't give them any more attention. Pray for them, but do not engage them because they're hostile. They would tear you into pieces if they could. So again, you'd have to make a judgment about these people in order to discern that. So Jesus is not saying don't judge, but be careful in your judging. But also be careful that you discern rightly. On one side, be careful that you don't judge incorrectly, but on the other side, make sure that you are judging and you're being careful with that. So there's a balance here. Jesus has given us a balance in our judgment. We have to be discerning. We have to be smart about what we're doing. And he keeps on. Then he's going to move in verse 7, in Matthew 7, 7 and 8, he's going to talk about prayer again. Now, in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus spent a lot of time. Matthew 6, he spent a lot of time, roughly verses 8 through 15 in the Lord's Prayer, which was a how-to pray. The Lord's Prayer was a how-to pray. It's not really a prayer. It's a how-to pray. And then in chapter 7, verses 7 and 8, he kind of continues real briefly, because this is how important prayer is. He brings it up again. Jesus is going to continue in how to pray. And he says in our prayer, verse 7 and 8, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds. And to him who knocks it will be open. This is a persistent prayer. Jesus is saying, you've got to be persistent in prayer. Persistent in prayer. Persistent in prayer. Matthew 6, we learned that God already knows what you need. He already knows your needs and your desires, and he already knows the things that are going on in your life. He knows that. You're not seeking God in prayer because you're telling him something he doesn't know. You're seeking God in prayer because it reveals your faith. It reveals where you are. Jesus is trying to reveal where you and I are through prayer. We're not going to Jesus. We're not going to God the Father in prayer because he doesn't know what we need. We're going to him because he wants us to acknowledge that he is the source of our meeting those needs. He wants us to humble ourselves and acknowledge that. And part of that humility is to keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. There might be something that God would have you continue to pray about for days or for months or even for years. There's things that I've been praying about for years, for months, for days. And I will keep praying about those things and keep praying about those things until God shows me that, gives me an answer, no or yes. So right now, for many of them, it's a wait. And so I'll find out an answer to that eventually. I have some things in my own life that I'm praying about right now. And some of those things that I've been praying diligently about right now look like a no in my life. They look like a no. And so I'm disappointed by that. But God knows what I need. He knows exactly what I need. What I think I need is different than what God says that I need. And so I have to trust him in that. I have to believe that he has something better for me than what I think is best. And so I'll keep asking, keep seeking, and keep knocking on these issues until God shows me the way. And it might be a day, 2 days, 5 days, a month, a year, 2 years, 10 years. Who knows? God's timing is perfect, and you and I have to trust that. So he says you keep asking, and you keep seeking, and you keep knocking. Now, part of that requirement, too, is that you're walking in obedience to God. You're doing the things of Matthew chapter 5 and chapter 6, the humility that he asks us to walk in, the right attitude, the doing more than we're asked to do. If you're asked to do this, if you're asked to go a mile, you go 2 miles. If you're asked to vacuum your den, you vacuum the den and you clean the kitchen. If you are asked to make dinner, you don't only make dinner, but then you make dessert and you clean up as well, even though that's not what you've been asked to do. You do more than you're asked to do. And people who do that find success in their lives. We're giving to others in need. We're loving on others. We're helping others. We're not getting revenge on others. We're letting God take revenge. We're not seeking rewards from people. We're letting God bring our rewards as we go quietly to him in prayer and fasting and just trusting him with everything. And then he says he'll answer those prayers. If you're not getting your prayers answered, there's a reason. There's a reason God's not working in your life. It's because you're not doing what he's asked you to do. See, God works in partnership with you and me. God provides this, and I do this, and then we come together, and it's a partnership, and then we work together, and then God can do the impossible in your life. God's ways are always going to be much greater than our ways, and so when we decide to surrender to God what he says we're to surrender, then we will find that we will have great success in our lives. It won't always be easy. It won't always be simple. It won't always be something that I like, but in the end, it will be something that I'll look back and go, wow, that was incredible. That was absolutely incredible what God has done and is doing in my life. So he goes on and he says in verse 9, well, what man is there among you who if his son asks for bread will give him a stone, or if he asks for a fish, he will give him a serpent. If you then, being evil, and that would be us compared to God, you and I are evil, we're selfish, we're greedy, we're ungrateful. Compared to God, that's what we are. So compared to God, we are evil. It doesn't mean you're doing evil things, but the character of man, I got a helicopter going over here, the character of man is compared to God is evil. And if you, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? So God knows your needs again. He knows, and if he's a good God, if he's a gracious God, if he's a loving God, the things that I have need of, he will provide. Now, not everything that I think I need is actually a need. I might think a brand new Ford F-350 is a need. It's not. It's a want, and God is not necessarily going to provide that, though he could. But it's not a need. I might define it as a need, but it's not a need. Transportation is a need, so he'll provide transportation. Food is a need. Doesn't mean he's going to provide lobster and steak every night. He's going to provide your necessities, not what you think you need. He will provide. Now, God, in his love and in his blessings, he wants to provide so much more in our lives. But we shouldn't expect it all the time. We shouldn't expect that God is going to do way above and beyond what we need. But when he does, we're to be grateful for those things. And the more we're grateful for those things and appreciate those things, the more he'll do above and beyond. So, but God is going to provide for us all of our needs because he's a loving God. So, and then finally in verse 12, he says, therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. You know, in our lives, we not only need God, but we need men, we need people too. Yes, we need God most of all, but God uses people and relationships with people to advance our lives, to advance his cause in our lives, to advance his mission in our lives. So if we think that we're not going to make it in this world without other people and without respecting other people and loving other people and caring for other people, if we think that we're going to get through life without respecting other people and putting others first, then we're not going to make it. We need people. We need people in our lives. We're all connected together. If we're Christians, we're in the body of Christ, and we all have different gifts and different talents that God will use all of us together to do something wonderful in our lives for him, for his glory. So he says, therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them. This would be called the golden rule. This is what many people would call Jesus providing for us the golden rule. However, while Jesus does state the golden rule here, he says it came from the law and the prophets. So he's just simply stating what the Old Testament was already teaching, that be kind to others, love others, care for others, and then they will do the same to you. So whatever you want from men, do that to them. Whatever you're doing to other people, expect to get it back. If you're abusing other people, expect to be abused. If you're caring and loving other people, expect to get that back from other people. So, and then finally in verse 13, 14, he touches, Jesus is going through a bunch of different topics here in Matthew chapter 7. He says in just these two verses, he talks about the narrow way. He says here, enter the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction. There are many who go by it. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are a few who find it. We can make two applications here. First is salvation. The first application would be salvation, the way to God, the way to heaven. Eternity with God in heaven is narrow. But it is defined by God, by Jesus Christ. It's defined by him. That narrow way is through Jesus Christ's shed blood on the cross, his death, burial, and resurrection, and our accepting that in our lives, that we fall short, that we are sinners, and that without Jesus Christ, we cannot make it to heaven. That is a narrow way. Religion has a more broad way, but it is very uncertain and unsure. What Jesus is providing us is certainty. You can be certain, you and I can be certain of salvation through that narrow way. He's not going to leave any doubt in our minds, in our hearts, that that we are heaven bound. We can be certain of that. Religion leaves uncertainty, because religion, all of the religions in the world except for one, Christianity, all of the religions in the world tell you you've got to work your way to heaven. You've got to do good works. You've got to do this and do that, and then you're not even sure if you're going to make it to heaven. You're not sure if you met all the standards, because there's so many different standards by so many different religions in the world, that soon we start to make up our own standard, and that changes day by day, and the next thing you know, we're so confused. So it breeds confusion, it breeds doubt, it breeds depression, it breeds uncertainty, where God, Jesus Christ, is our way to him through his death, burial, and resurrection, his shed blood on the cross of Calvary. He gives us a narrow way, a certain way that you can have full confidence in. Wherein religion in general just says, hey, good luck. Maybe you've done enough, maybe you haven't. We'll see you in the end where you end up. It's just a crapshoot, It's just whatever makes you feel good, do that, and maybe you'll make it to heaven. Maybe you won't. Where Jesus is like, nope, there's a narrow way, and this is it, and you can be certain of it, and I provide that for you. So there's a narrow way to salvation, and then there's a narrow way to just success in life in general. And that narrow way has been everything that we've talked about in Matthew chapters 5 and 6. The loving others, putting others before you, giving, not getting revenge on people, letting God provide you your rewards. Being a rebel in this culture. If you want to be a rebel, follow Jesus, because following this world, chasing after the things of this world, the wealth, the wine, the women, chasing after all of those things is not rebellion. You're just like the world. If you want to be a rebel, chase after Jesus, because it's the narrow way. It's the thing that people are not doing. So if you want to be a rebel against the culture, if you want to be a rebel against everything out there, follow Jesus. And believe me, people won't like you much at all. They will destroy you, like Jesus said there in verse number 11, or before that even. He says, verse number 6, he said, they will tear you up into pieces, because you're rubbing against the culture, and they don't like what you're doing. They don't like it at all, and they're not going to like your success, and they're not going to like your attitude, and they're not going to like that you're getting victory in your life. They're not going to like those things. They want to drag you back down into the cesspool that they're living in. They want to drag you back down into the discouragement and the depression and all those things that they're living in, and that's not what God has for you. So be a rebel against this culture and live for Christ. That's what he's asking us to do here. So he says, because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way, which leads to life. So it's going to be hard, but it's a good hard. It's like after you work out, and the working out is hard. You do a good workout on the weights, and then you're sore, but that soreness is good. It means your muscles are growing. And so there's a difficult life that's difficult, that just tears you down, and there's a difficult life that builds you up. You want the difficult life that builds you up, not tears you down. But either one's going to be difficult. Life is going to be difficult either way. Life is going to be difficult without Christ, or it's going to be difficult with Christ. One tears you down, one builds you up. You got to decide which one you want. Which one do you want? The one that tears you down? I don't. Or do you want the one that builds you up? That's the one I want. So he goes on to say, again, verse 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, he's going to talk about judging people again. So he's going to tell us to judge people. And he says here in verse 15, beware of false prophets. Well, if I'm going to beware of false prophets, I've got to judge people. I've got to know. He says, who come to you in sheep's clothing, but are inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. So he's saying you will know them by what their life produces, which means you got to make a judgment. You got to be judging their life. You've got to look at them, at people who are coming around you, and decide, is this person good for me or bad for me? What's the outcomes of their life? What's the fruit of their life? What are they producing in their life? And if they're producing negative things in their life, if their walk is negative, if their actions are negative, if their talk is negative, if their attitude is negative, bad fruit. He says, get away from them. They're a tree that's bearing bad fruit. a bad tree will not bear good fruit, and a good tree will not bear bad fruit. He says, so you've got to make a judgment call. You've got to be careful how you're judging people over here. On one hand, that you're not judging them without first looking at yourself. But on the other hand, you better be making sure you are judging them. You better be making sure that you are rightly judging people, because if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be hanging around these people, and they're not going to be good for you, and they're going to tear you down. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. You're no good. If you're bearing bad fruit, what do I need you around for? A tree that bears bad fruit is going to be cut down because it's no use anymore. I can't sell bad fruit. So if I can't sell it, if I can't eat it, if I can't use it, it's got to be cut down and burned. And something else is better has got to replace that. Therefore, by their fruits you'll know them. So it's a judgment. I'm making a judgment on these people. You better be ready to judge the people who are coming around you, to make sure that you're a fruit inspector. You're judging the fruit. You're a fruit inspector. It's what he says here. He says you will know them by their fruits. So you better be inspecting the fruit. You better be inspecting their lives. And if you get if the red lights are going off and the alarms are going off, get away from them. They're no good. The people you hang around, that's who you become. You become the people that you hang around, and we don't want that. We want to hang around godly people who are good for us, who are going to go in the right direction. So he says, let everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father is. I'm in verse 21 now. So you know what? I'm gonna stop right there. We're about almost 30 minutes into this, and so I've been trying to keep these again to. I know I say that all the time. I'm trying to keep these to 30 minutes. So I'll pick up in verse 21 then on our next on chapter 7 part 2. So I want to stop right there and just let's end with a few questions. How's your life? Are you doing a proper evaluation of your life? Are you getting the things out of your life that you need to be getting? Are you getting things right with between you and God before you can properly discern and judge other people and who's good for you and who's not good for you? You better make sure that those things are out of your life. If you're going to let those bad things hang around in your life, then you're going to gravitate toward those people who are continuing to do the things that you shouldn't be doing and that they shouldn't be doing. They're going to drag you down. So, are you doing an inventory of the things in your life that you need to do? Number 2, are you asking? Are you seeking? Are you knocking to God on things that you need to take in prayer? Keep in front of Him. Don't quit. Are you being persistent in prayer over and over and over? Don't give up. God knows what you need. He states very clearly, He will provide. Will our God, who's a good God, will He not provide us with good things? He will, but we have to make sure that our life is a life that's honoring and glorifying to God, so He can do that. Number 3, are you saved? Have you taken the narrow way for salvation through the shed blood of Jesus Christ on the cross? Do you know for sure, 100%, without a doubt, that you're going to go to heaven and spend eternity with God? Religion doesn't cut it. Doing good works doesn't cut it. Now, we do good works because we are saved. We don't do good works to be saved. Ephesians chapter 2 is very clear about that. We do good works because we are saved, not because we want to be saved. Have you accepted the narrow way, the certain way, the one way that God provides us, or are you struggling with trying to do this and do that, or discover some new way of getting closer to God, or making yourself available to God so you can be the best person you can be, so He'll bring you into heaven? You'll be changing religions every other month if you're doing that, because it's confusing and it's discouraging, and it's full of uncertainty. God is not a God of uncertainty. He's a God of certainty, and He wants to provide you that certainty not only in your life, for your day-to-day living, but certainly, most of all, for your salvation. So are you certain about where you're going to go when you leave this earth? Because you and I, one thing is certain, you will die. You and I will both pass away from this crazy world and go into a place with God or without God. But it's our decision. God leaves that up to us. anyway, those are the questions that we'll end with right there. And I know one more question. How are you treating people? That was the other one I wanted to. How are you treating other people? If again, we're going to need God, and we're going to need people to make it in this world. And how you treat others is how you will be treated. So, all right, we're going to end right there. I'm right at about 30 minutes, so we're ending Matthew chapter 7, or at least through verse 20, and then we'll pick up in verse 21 next time. Have a great day.